Do you know what time it is? It's Supernatural Storytime. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. A fearful story. It was cold outside. The kind of cold that gets straight through all your layers and surrounds you like an ice bath. I had done the deed, of course. Maggie would be concerned and probably waiting near the door, not sitting but standing near her chair the way she always did when she was worried. I can't even tell you why. She had been so religious before John died. She was the go-to church every morning, keep a rosary in her glove box type. If someone would have asked me 3 days ago if she was into dark magic or the like, I would have been offended. Now it is what we are counting on. I walked up to the front door and with a sigh turned the knob and opened it. I looked to the right to see Maggie standing exactly the way I had pictured. She was wringing her hands and staring at me. She wasn't the type to pace. She had been standing in that spot for a while. "Have you done it, Johnny?" she asked, as if she was pleading. "Let's not talk about it." I shook off the cold and stepped over the threshold. "Close the door, please. I want to talk about this," she said. I took a seat on the couch and kept my jacket on. I wasn't exactly trying to get comfortable. The night had just started. She stared at me from her little perch there by her chair. "Well, talk," I said with maybe a little too much force. "You don't have to take that tone with me. I was just trying to gather my thoughts," she said. I didn't know what to say. She just had me do something I was taught never in my life to do. And now she doesn't want me to hurt her feelings? I could not help feeling bad, however. We had just lost her son, and she had not exactly taken it in stride. "Maggie, I'm sorry. This whole thing has got me a little shook up," I said and put on my best sincere face. There was a sound by the door and Maggie's head jerked that way. The noise was slight, but I reacted as well. My heart fluttered in my chest, but the noise did not continue. We glared at the door for a moment more. "How settling," I said. She turned away from the door and let her shoulders loosen up. We stayed silent for a long time, flinching at every little noise. Maggie ended up taking a seat after about 20 minutes, and she sat there rocking in that old wooden chair. She had rocked both our children in that same chair. Bo was 10 years older than John, and now lives up in Alaska working the pipeline, almost the only good-paying job around here. John took up that same mantle, roughnecking on the rigs and working his ass off to possibly get promoted. He had only been on the rig for 6 months. He was barely 19. A pipe separated from the rig and shot him right into a building. They said it was instant, but he had been crushed between the pipe and the wall. It was a closed casket, obviously. We hadn't even had time to tell Bo about it. I still have the letter sitting on my desk. Don't know if I can send it. Maggie came up with this crazy idea after all that, and now I don't know anything. I could see Maggie look at me in my periphery. She glanced a few times and settled in her chair and huffed as if to get my attention. "Johnny, what did she stopped and gulped breath. "What did he say when you met him?" I had met the young man out near the cemetery. My wife had told me about the man, describing him as an occultist. He was said to have helped a few grieving parents around the country. She told me he approached her in a department store. She was there to pick up some incidentals. She was in the feminine hygiene aisle, and this young guy comes around the corner. He described himself as a personal injury lawyer and told Maggie that he didn't want to imply anything, but he could see a tragedy coming in her eyes. That was the day that John died. It could have been at that exact moment. We didn't find out until later. She called him using the number from the card he had given her, and after some initial accusations from her, he explained what he had been trained from birth to do. I didn't believe a word of it, and I still don't, but I went along with it, mainly because I couldn't stand to see my wife of 25 years in such pain. The young man came to the cemetery dressed like he had just played 9 holes at the fairway in town. He was in a salmon polo and khaki pants. At this point in the day, it was still in the 50s, before some Arctic current came in, and dropped the temperature into the teens. I spoke with him for a moment. I almost forgot about his flair with dark magic when I saw him dressed up as some frat boy. I guess no one would see him coming. Maybe that was the point. He told me to bring with me some item John had owned. I brought his class ring with me. The young man took out a strange pair of bowls. He took the ring from me and put it in one, sprinkling it with some powder he had in a vial. He then put dirt into the other bowl. Throughout the process, he spoke under his breath and knelt near my son's fresh grave. He took a lighter from his pocket and lit it in the bowl with John's ring in it. It ignited into a green flame and shot flames higher than I had expected. I stepped back. He, however, leaned in closer. The flames are not dangerous. They can't burn you. He stuck his hand into the now diminishing flame until it died out. See, he said. I guess, I said, was starting to get a little suspicious of this whole thing. He poured the melted remains of the ring into the dirt and grass in the other bowl. The orange birthstone fell into the silvery puddle and settled facing the twilight sky. He took out another vial and poured it into the bowl. With a poof of red smoke, the dirt and metal turned into a strange blood-red mixture. What the hell is that? I asked, more and more agitated by the second. Who does this guy think he is? Essence. This will bring your son back to life or kill a live person. It is part of the process. He dug his finger into the ground in the center of the grave. He pushed it as deep as it would go, all the way to the joint, and pulled it out. He slowly poured the mixture into the hole. Know why I used the center of the grave? He asked. I said nothing. I had enough of his blasé vibe. So it doesn't seep into any others. Wouldn't want people's relatives just creeping out of here as well. Not for free anyway. This guy was ridiculous. He finished pouring, then covered the hole with a green plastic cap. He put his bowls into a plastic bag he had in his pocket. Then he stood, wiping the grass from his pants. He turned and faced me. You know the price, he said. I do. I just have a question, I said, advancing on him. He tried to get out of my way, but I had been living out here a while. I was a cowboy just like my father before me, and I had been in my share of bar fights and tumbles. He didn't seem as experienced. I pushed him into a headstone and it caught the back of his knees. If not for me grabbing the front of his shirt, he would have been on the ground. I have your $2,000 and I plan to give it to you. I just want you to know that I know you are trying to fuck an old lady out of her last dime. Spittle was shooting from my mouth as I got more and more mad. You are the worst kind of man, and coming from me, that is definitely an insult. I let go of his shirt and let him fall into the other side of the headstone. I gave him the finger for good measure. He looked nonplussed, but he didn't seem upset. I know how you feel. I wouldn't trust me either. But I grew up with these skills, and I have seen them work time and time again. It will work, and when it does, you'll thank me. He started trying to get up. Fuck you, boy. I took the money from my chest pocket and took the rubber band off. Then I threw the bundle right in his face, blowing hundreds all over the cemetery with the wind. He did not complain. He instead stayed where he was. He knew I was past convincing. I walked back to my truck. My wife left you a $400 tip, I said before I got in my truck and drove away. I ended up at a bar for about 2 hours and drank. I drank myself into a state where I couldn't feel the shame for what I had just done. I broke a cardinal rule. I wasn't ever religious, but I wasn't a Satanist neither. I let my wife and my grief convince me to lend myself to witchcraft. I went home feeling just drunk enough to get in the door. I already said I don't want to talk about it, Maggie. I just fucking don't, I said. She looked taken back. After all this, she looked surprised. You don't have to say the F word. You don't ever curse. Maybe I'm in the cursing mood. I don't think we should call it cursing either. I feel like cursed us with this spell bullshit you are so happy to have me do. I stood up. I wasn't having it. The obvious next step was for Maggie to cry. The tears welled in her eyes and she started that sniffling she does. I just wanted her son back, Johnny. It wasn't fair. You aren't treating me fair, she was bawling. I was about to explode. How dare she play the victim here? I sacrificed principles. I condemned my soul. Life ain't fair, Maggie, goddammit. This is the way it is. You grieve, then you move on. He was our son, but now I was starting to well up. He was better off dead. There was a knock at the door. It was soft but firm. It was the way John knocked. The hairs on my neck stood. It could not be John. None of this was possible. Maggie screamed. My feet were frozen to the floor. She looked at me, tears still on her face. I looked at the door. The knock came again. It seemed to shake me loose. I stepped toward the door. No, Maggie howled. What? I don't know. Just wait a second, she said. There was a voice from behind the door. It was raspy and low, but it was my son's voice. Mom, Dad, let me in. It's cold. His voice sent shivers through my entire body. He was never supposed to speak again, but here he was. It was unnatural, but it was my son. You can't let him in, Johnny. You just can't, Maggie pleaded. You gotta be kidding, Maggie. You were all for this 10 seconds ago. The knocking got harder. I'm freezing. Please let me in. John's voice quivered a bit. What if... Maggie paused. I waited a moment. What if fucking what, Maggie? I don't know. What if it was a curse? What if that's not our baby John out there, but some monster? He was mutilated when he died. How can he be whole now? She was up from her chair and standing behind it by then. I hadn't thought of this. What if he was a monster? What if I had made the man that did this so mad he cursed us too? Just wait until it goes away, Maggie said. Please, please let me in. Daddy, please. I can hear you in there talking. I wept huge tears. I almost collapsed. Here my son was once again ready to take on life again. But I knew I couldn't let him in or let him live this way. I can't. He'll be someone else's problem. I won't let our curse affect anyone else. I walked to the gun rack and grabbed my daddy's old cracked barrel 12 gauge. Maggie screamed in a way I've never heard. No, Johnny. No, don't. It'll die of the cold. I won't take that chance. I walked up to the door and placed the barrel above mid-height. Daddy, let me in, please. I can't feel my hands. I don't understand what is going on. I convulsed with tears. I could barely hold a shotgun. Johnny, stop, Maggie squealed. I love you, son, I said. I love you with all my heart. I pulled the trigger and the door cracked and busted beneath the shot. I heard it hit John on the other side. I heard him stumble back, breaking the glass storm door as he went. I heard him hit the ground and let out a last huff of air. I crumpled to the ground. Mary hollered in the background, her screams filling the room. My son died twice in the span of 5 days. I knew I was never going to forgive myself for this. I had done many things in my 43 years. Stolen, lied, cheated, but never anything like this. If not for Maggie, I would have taken the extra shell in my pocket and knelt with that shotgun to my chin. I could hear Maggie still crying and making a racket behind me, but it seemed a little different now. It was less a sob and more a cackle. I gradually turned my head and saw she was standing in the middle of the room. She stared at me as her face contorted into something a human face shouldn't be able to. Maggie, I said. Her face had become more angular. Her eyes, stretched and squinty, were angled down. Her nostrils flared and her lips were pulled back, baring her teeth. She seemed to be smiling. She was smiling. Some crooked, horrible smile, like someone was pulling her lips back to the point they almost split open. It spoke a language I assumed was Latin and then cackled again. Furit parumper aberunt. I had no idea what it said, but it definitely was not Maggie. It advanced on me and I brought up the shotgun. It laughed and said one last thing. Numquid si occidero te tormenta amet. It said in its gluttonous, jowly voice. Maggie's body went into violent convulsions and fell to the floor. Smoke rose from her body like she had been electrocuted. No, God damn it, no, I screamed. the front door flew open and I felt the cold from outside. And another cold. Way colder than the climate permeated my being. Then it went away just as quickly as it came on. I looked at Maggie's body. There was no breathing, no signs of life. I knew what happened. Whatever had inhabited her killed her upon leaving. It's what tempted me to talk with that fucking necromancer. I wanted to scream and rage and break everything. But all I could feel was dread and a deep hollow in my chest. I turned to the door. It was still half open. I could at least see my son one last time, dead, mutilated. It didn't matter. He deserved more than all this. I grabbed the door and pulled it open. I saw his legs in the jeans he always wore. As the door opened further, I could see his torso and the hole in his chest where I'd shot him. The door was open all the way now. I felt an icy wave of horror wash over me when I realized what I'd shot. John laid outside on the front patio with one hand on his chest and one off to his side. John, besides the gunshot, was as whole as the day he was born. The deep part of the lake. There are over 3 million lakes in Alaska, more than anywhere else in the United States. Lakes are eerie because, for the most part, the water never goes anywhere. If you want to lose something forever, you can drop it in the ocean or a river and rest assured that it will never resurface in the same place that you dropped it. But lakes just sit there. Your secrets might sink to the bottom, but they don't actually go anywhere. Despite this, however, if you grew up here, it was likely that your parents or your uncle or your best friend's family or someone else in your close circle had a cabin on one of the various lakes that dot the land. Such was the case for me. I'm an only child to 2 wealthy, well-off parents. We have a large extended family who, for the most part, are also wealthy and well-off. Because of this, I surprisingly had a mostly wonderful childhood. Despite not having any siblings, I have many cousins, both in the state and in other places in the United States, and much of my childhood was spent with them. When I was 2, my Uncle Harold bought the cabin. I'm not going to put the name of the lake it was on here, because it's imperative that you do not go search for the location of what I'm about to describe. Trust me when I say it will do more harm than good to your psyche. Perhaps some of you will anyway, but the chances that you live in Alaska and will be able to pick this particular lake out of the 3 million plus are pretty slim. My first memories of Uncle Harold's cabin come from when I was 4 or 5. I have a vague memory of being there when my dog was a puppy, which would have been when I was 2, but my first real memories aren't until later. We would go up to the lake on the weekends a lot, with Harold and his wife Agatha and their 5 kids who were all much older than me, or with my uncle Jeff and his 4 kids. I liked going with Jeff more because his kids were much closer to my age. When I was 4, Mandy was 5, Eddie was 7, Jake was 10, and Melissa was 11. All of Harold's kids were 16 or older and didn't have much interest in playing with us, but that was just fine. The 4 of us would spend the days on the jet skis and wave runners, or tubie, knee boarding, and water skiing, while our dads drove the boat, whipping it in circles to make us fly through the air. When we weren't out in the water, we would jump on the water trampoline Harold set up, or comb the strip of sand by the dock for minnows, make sand castles, or play in the woods that separated the cabin from the dock. Aside from the main cabin, there was a fancy outhouse, which was mostly for show. The cabin had indoor plumbing, a greenhouse and a sprawling front yard, a smaller but still large backyard, and the bunkhouse. The bunkhouse was where Harold's kids stayed when they came up, and where Eddie and Jake slept when the 5 of us and our parents came up. The cabin had only 1 bedroom, with 2 full beds in it which went to our parents. Mandy, Mel, and I would sleep on the pull-out couches in the living room, or sometimes, when we got really adventurous, we would sleep outside in the boat under the midnight sun. But more often than not, Eddie and Jake didn't join us and slept in the bunkhouse. I didn't understand why they did it. The bunkhouse was disgusting. It had the potential to be cool with 2 bunk beds built into the wall, a large window, and some beanbag chairs. I can see how they thought it would be a total man cave. But it was where we kept the inner tubes, water skis, and the small jet ski when no one was at the cabin. So the carpet was perpetually wet, and the place always smelt of lake water. Plus, because it was always so wet inside, it was infested with mosquitoes. Eddie and Jake always let it air out before sleeping in the bunkhouse, and while the beds would always end up dry before they slept in them, the place still grossed me out. But alas, sometimes I was forced to hang out there if I wanted to be with my cousins. Some nights, when the weather outside was rainy or cold, and Mandy and Mel and I had watched every VHS tape, and our parents had had too much wine and wouldn't shut up, we would retreat to the bunkhouse to hang out with the boys. Eddie and Jake were obsessed with scary stories and would always bring a bunch of scary storybooks wherever they went. I loved listening to Jake read the stories out loud. Even as a little kid, they fascinated me. One particular night in late August when I was 8, he pulled out a new book. Still More Scary Stories for Sleepovers was the title. Which one should we read? Jake said. He pretended to flip through the book, but it was clear he already had a story picked out. Aha! How about this one? He turned the page towards us. I don't remember the exact title, but it was something about creatures in a lake. Typical. He read with bravado while Mandy and I curled up together. Mel sat back against the beanbag chair, flipping through her own book, seemingly uninterested in Jake's story. Eddie sat at Jake's feet, admiring his older brother. And I scratched at the fuzzy patch on my cheek, but it didn't go away. It just grew bigger and bigger, Jake said sometime later, finishing the story. He paused for effect and flickered the lights a few times. Mandy and I laughed and clapped for the performance, but Mel rolled her eyes. She was irritated by being disturbed from her teen romance novel. You know, Jess and Mandy can read now, right? She said to Jake. Jake lightly tossed the book at her, knocking her own book out of her hands. What's your point? Hey, she angrily tossed the book back and picked her book up off the damp carpet. My point is, be more original for a change. Still not getting it, Jake gave her a confused look. The rest of us were pretty confused too, and turned her way. Like? Make up your own scary story. Any one of us can read that dumb book. I like when Jake reads to us, I said. Yeah, me too, Mandy chimed in. But I can make up a story too. And so Mandy proceeded to tell us an absolutely terrifying story that she made up about a haunted sheep called Homer who lived on a haunted farm. I giggled when she was finished. That's not scary, I said, still giggling. Yeah, you suck, said Jake. Tears welled up in Mandy's eyes, and she looked like she was about to cry. Damn it, Jake. Mom will kill me if any of the kids come in crying. Mel threw her hands up. Just go back to reading from your book. Trying to change the subject, I turned back to Jake. Do you know any other scary stories? One that aren't in the book? I asked Jake. He thought for a moment, scratching his head. I mean, I probably do. Let me think about it. I know one. We all turned to stare at Eddie. He had been unusually quiet this whole time. Jake laughed. Sure you do. No, really, I do. Jasper told me it. Who's Jasper? Mel asked. That kid from 2 cabins down, Mandy said. I knew who they were talking about. I had met Jasper all of one time. It was on a night that Mandy and Eddie and I were sleeping in the boat. Mel had fallen asleep inside and Jake had chosen to sleep in the bunkhouse, so it was just the 3 of us. It was probably 11 at night, though hard to tell because the sky was still a pinkish yellow and there was ample light. Jasper scared all of us when he stumbled out of the bushes onto the short strip of sand that we called the beach. He explained that his family had a cabin 2 down from us, which in lake terms is pretty far. The cabins, for the most part, are not close together. I wasn't even sure it was possible to get to our cabin from the surrounding land. I thought it was accessible only by boat, but I didn't see a jet ski or canoe or anything Jasper could have used to get over to us. Mandy and I weren't very excited about hanging out with a stranger, but Eddie and Jasper took a quick liking to one another. I think they were close in age, but it was hard to tell as Jasper was obviously very small for his age. He had strawberry blonde hair, practically non-existent eyebrows, and the eyes so blue they were almost translucent. It should have been cool, but his eyes were honestly kind of freaky. He stayed out there with us the whole night talking to Eddie. Mandy and I tried to sleep, but their constant chatter kept us awake most of the night. We must have dozed off at some point, because when Jake came and got us for breakfast the next morning, Mandy, Eddie, and I were alone, and we had all been asleep. They had to have been 2 summers before, and while Eddie brought up Jasper sometimes and said that he had seen him several more times at the lake, Mandy and I hadn't seen him again. "You still see that kid?" Jake asked. "Yeah, I saw him yesterday," Eddie said emphatically. "What?" Mandy crinkled her nose. "We were out on the water all day yesterday. When did you see him?" "After the bonfire, when you had all gone to sleep." Eddie said this like it was nothing. "What?" "But we came to the bunkhouse at the same time," Jake said. "I saw you go to bed." "Yeah, but then later Jasper knocked on the door, so I went out and played with him." Again, Eddie acted like there was nothing strange about this. He had Mel's full attention now. She flipped her book closed and sat up straighter. What? Why have I never heard of this kid before? Do Mom and Dad know you're getting up in the middle of the night to go play in the woods by yourself?" Eddie rolled his eyes at her. "It's not by myself. I'm with Jasper." "But Jasper's like your age." "Or younger," Mandy protested. Eddie looked at Jake, I think expecting Jake to defend him, but he didn't. He just stared oddly at his little brother. I agree with Mel," Jake said carefully. I don't know, man, that doesn't sound safe. Why haven't you introduced Jasper to Mom and Dad and Jerry and Tiff?" Eddie shrugged. "I don't know. He always comes to play at night when you're all sleeping. I don't get why you guys are making it such a big deal. Jasper knows the woods and the lake really well. Last night we went swimming really far out and..." "What?" "Okay, no. That's it, Eddie. You promise me right now that you will never hang out with this kid again unless you introduce him to Mom and Dad and they know about it, okay?" Mel had Eddie's face in her hands, and she looked genuinely concerned. His eyes filled with tears, but none of us were on his side at this point. He didn't say anything. "Edward, I'm serious. Promise me, or I will go inside and tell Mom and Dad right now." Mel stared into his eyes. "Okay, I promise," he said, and started to cry. "Don't cry, Eddie. We aren't mad at you," Mel said. "We're just worried. It isn't safe for anyone, not even me and Jake or even Mom and Dad, to go swimming alone at night. Don't you remember learning about the buddy system? That's why the 5 of us stick together. Even Mom and Dad and Uncle Jerry and Aunt Tiff don't just go out on the lake alone." But he kept crying. "Seriously, dude, stop. We aren't mad at you," Jake said, patting Eddie's back. "I'm not crying because I think you're mad at me," Eddie said between sobs. "I'm crying because now I'll never get to see my friend again." Jake furrowed his brow. "Eddie, just introduce him to Mom and Dad. Have his parents come over, meet them. If you're hanging out with this kid in a safe way, Mom and Dad and Mel and I will be okay with it. Just don't do it at night when no one else is around." But Eddie adamantly shook his head. "He won't come over during the day, and he doesn't have parents." "He doesn't have parents?" I asked, surprised. When we first met Jasper, he had said his parents owned the cabin 2 doors down. "No, I'm not supposed to tell anyone, but it doesn't matter now because I'll never see him again." Eddie started crying all over again. Jake and Mel exchanged a look. "What do you mean he doesn't have parents?" Mel said slowly. "Who does he live with?" "No, I can't tell you anything else. I already wasn't supposed to tell you that, and now, if I ever do see him again, he'll be really mad, and he might make me go into his house again, and I do not want to do that." Now Jake, Mel, Mandy, and I all exchanged a look. Mel took a deep breath, clearly trying to think of how to go about this. "Eddie," she said gently, "where is Jasper's house?" "2 down from us, I told you already," he said, exasperated. "Can you show us?" she asked. Eddie shuddered. "I don't like his house." "But we'll be with you," I said. "Yeah, Mel and Mandy and Jessa and I will protect you. We'll all protect each other," Jake said. At this point, we all knew something was up, but we also knew that if we jumped the gun and told our parents, Eddie would likely freak out and still hang out with his friend and just be more secretive about it, which we really didn't want. So with a little more prodding, we convinced him to take us to Jasper's house, aka the cabin 2 doors down. It was not 2 doors, and there wasn't technically a cabin 1 door down, just a rotting shed. We made our way through the brush at the edge of the lake in a single file line that wrapped around the land. After we passed the old tumbled-down shed, Eddie pointed up ahead. "It's just up there a little more," he said nervously. "Ow," I gasped as something scratched my leg. We looked down and saw that we were standing in a thick patch of devil's club that seemed to stretch out all around us. Tears filled my eyes as my leg started to bleed. "It's okay, Jess, come here." Jake picked me up and swung me onto his back, and we trudged forth. It was probably 1 a.m. by this time, and since it was August, the sun was setting much more than it had been in June. It wasn't pitch black out, but a dark blue that pressed in around us on all sides. We kept walking until we were out of Devil's Club, and Eddie led us more inland, further away from the lake. After 20 more minutes of this, Mel stopped and spun around to face us. "This is ridiculous. We've been walking a mile or more, and it's the middle of the night, and there's no houses anywhere around. Is this some kind of fucking joke, Eddie?" "What? No, it's up here, I swear." "Yeah? Well, if you made all of this up and dragged us out here, you do realize it's Jake and I who are going to get in trouble, right? Did you think of that?" Eddie balled his hands into fists. "I didn't even want to come here. You guys all wanted to. So you should be the ones who get in trouble if we get caught." Mel threw up her hands. "I should never have let this happen." Jake put his hand on his shoulder. "Mel, calm down. We're already this far. We'll just go a little further, and if nothing's there, we'll turn back. It'll still be hours before Mom and Dad are up." She pouted, but we kept walking. Finally, Eddie pushed back some of the thinner birch stalks and pointed through them into a small clearing. "That's it, there." My heart immediately sank when I saw the cabin. It looked terrifying. I assumed it had once been a dark brown or purple color, but it was so weathered with age that now it just looked black. The wood that made up the house looked perpetually soaked, like if we touched it, it would fall apart from wood rot. "Someone lives there?" Mandy asked in a quiet voice. "Jasper does." "What about his parents?" "I told you, he hasn't got any." Mel squatted down and put her hands on Eddie's shoulder. "Eddie, you know that no little kid can live alone, right? You do know that, don't you?" He just stared at her. Do you think you could survive without Mom and Dad? How would you get food or money? Who would protect you when you get scared during storms?" From the look on Eddie's face, it was clear that this had all occurred to him, but that he was simply denying that his friend's existence was impossible. His face fell. "I know something is strange about Jasper, but he's my friend." "I know," said Mel, "but you have to tell us whatever you aren't telling us. You need to, okay? We won't be mad, and we'll try to help you and Jasper." "Okay, well, there's 2 things that are strange about him. Well, 3. But the first 2 are easier." "Easier?" Jake asked. "Yeah, the first 2 are that he doesn't have parents, and he doesn't have birthdays." "That's what he said?" I asked. "That he doesn't have parents or birthdays?" "Yeah." "What about the 3rd weird thing?" Jake asked. "It's about the house. It's so strange. I'll show you." Eddie pushed ahead of us and stepped onto the sagging, decrepit porch. He opened the door effortlessly, and we reluctantly followed him inside. I was still on Jake's back, and I burrowed my face between his shoulder blades. Jake and Mel took out the flashlights they had brought with them and shined them around the front hallway. The place smelled disgusting, wet, just like it looked. All around us, we were consumed by the smell of rotting wood and smoke, which made no sense. The carpet seemed damp too, the way it was in the bunkhouse. The front door opened into a small hallway lined with doors, 3 on each side. All of them were locked with rusted padlocks. The front living room was to our left and completely bare, save for one small sofa that was by that point pretty much just a frame. The hallway ended at what must have been a kitchen, judging by the pipes in the walls, but all the appliances had been ripped out and removed long ago. Mandy laughed nervously. Eddie, it's pretty clear no one has lived here in a long time, she said. No, Jasper lives here. His parents are here too. What? I thought you said he didn't have parents. Well, everyone has parents at some point, but they aren't alive. They're here, though. I felt Jake's breath catch in his chest as he and Mel exchanged a look. Looking back, I can't imagine how terrified they would have been. Mandy and I, however, didn't piece together the fact that we might stumble across some dead bodies until later. Have you seen Jasper's parents? Mel asked, her voice shaking. No. They're behind that door, though, Eddie said, pointing to the closest door on the right. It was silent for a moment, then Jake slowly slid me off down his back. Stay here, he said firmly, leaving the four of us in the center of the dilapidated kitchen. He made his way over to the door Eddie had pointed at, and ever so slowly leaned his ear against it. After a minute of this, he raised his hand and rapped lightly on the door. Nothing. He knocked louder this time. Still nothing. Hey, is anyone in there? He said, barely above a whisper. Nothing. Hey, is anyone in there? He said much louder this time. Still no noise came from behind the door, but suddenly a voice rang out around us. You don't want them to wake up. It was a child's voice and seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Jake leaned back from the door and we saw him, the small figure at the end of the hall, blocking our exit. Jasper, Eddie called out, slowly jogging towards his friend. Eddie, don't! Jake reached out and grabbed Eddie before he could reach the front entryway, but it didn't matter because Jasper had already taken off running to the right of the front door. We all looked at each other thinking the same thing, that we didn't realize there was anything other than a wall to the right of the front door. We followed the direction Jasper had gone and saw a small hatch open in the door, a crawl space. Eddie pointed down the hatch triumphantly. That's where Jasper lives. I've never been down there, but he always asked me to come with him. I've always been too scared, though. At this point, I would like to say we turned around, that we hightailed it out of there all the way back to our cabin and came back with some adults. Or didn't come back at all. But it's hard to describe when you're in that situation, especially as a kid. It was almost like everything was already so improbable, so beyond anything we could have imagined possible, that we stopped questioning it, and so we followed Eddie down the hatch. First Jake, then me, then Mandy, then Mel. We couldn't see anything at first, and then our eyes adjusted to the dim light from the flashlights, and we saw that we were absolutely surrounded by equipment. Metal operating tables, medical tools, and restraints from everywhere. If I had seen it as an adult, I wouldn't have known whether to think it was a sick medical facility or a sex dungeon. But as an 8-year-old, all I knew was that this was wrong. Whatever this room, this house, was not supposed to exist. Not out here in the middle of the woods, on the lake, not anywhere. Holy shit. Jake shone his flashlight all around at the array of torture instruments surrounding us. Jasper was nowhere to be found. I think this is a crime scene, Mel said. We shouldn't be here. We have to go get our parents now. Everyone, even Eddie, agreed. I'll go first, Jake said. Mel, you go last. Keep them in between us. He started up the ladder and we followed closely behind. Once he got to where he could reach the door, we were all on the ladder. Jake on the top rung, Mel on the bottom one, and the three of us kids in between. Jake paused with his hand on the door. It was as if he couldn't bring himself to open it. It's taken me years, but I finally figured out what to like in that moment too. It was like when animals can sense an earthquake. We all knew that we shouldn't have opened the door, that something terrible was on the other side, but we had no other choice. So with one final look at all of us, Jake gripped the rusted metal handle and pushed upward. Some people say drowning is peaceful. Some say it is the most violent death you can imagine. For me, it was neither. Dying itself didn't hurt. I mean, I was utterly terrified, more so than I had ever been in my life, but that had nothing to do with drowning. I've always been comfortable around water. No, it was what I saw. When Jake pushed open the door, it didn't open into the house. Instead, it opened up on the floor of the lake. But of course, we didn't figure that out right away. We didn't even have time to scream. The water filled our lungs so quickly. And just like that, there was no house, no medical torture chamber, just inky black water all around us. And God, was it cold. The lake was okay to swim in during the day, but at night it got colder, and we were so far down. I had no idea what to do, or where my cousins were, but my body instinctually knew to go up. That's what you do when you're underwater, right? Something flashed in my mind. Something about how you could get hurt if you try to swim upwards from under the water too quickly. So I tried to slow myself down. I wish I hadn't. The worst case of the bends would have been better than what I saw. As I struggled to swim upwards slowly in the freezing water, my feet pushed off the frozen mud on the floor of the lake, and my hand brushed over something. I thought it was a rock at first, but then I felt something on my fingers. I struggled to bring them up to my face underwater to see them, but I couldn't. Suddenly, though, a light flashed over where I was. The flashlights. One of them had fallen from Mel or Jake's pocket, and I saw it. It looked like corn silk at first, but the glistening, stark white skull came into my line of vision, and I realized it was hair. Strawberry blonde hair. I stared in horror at the body in front of me. It was mostly a skeleton by now, with only a few fragments of skin and clothing attached to it. I backpedaled frantically in the water, causing the flashlight to swirl around. There were dozens of them, skeletons in varying degrees of decay, but most of them were down to the bare bones and looked like they had been there for a long time. I used my last breath to scream. And then I opened my eyes. I was still underwater, but I could breathe again, and I could see without the flashlight. I blinked and looked around, still horrified by what I had seen. But then I saw Jasper, the same as he had been the night we first met him. A bunch of other kids were with him. They weren't skeletons anymore. Jasper extended a hand to me. I hope you don't think I'm a bad person. They were terrible people, Jessa. I had to kill them. And then I came down here because I missed them. I missed them, he gestured to the other kids. So much. When I met Eddie, I knew I couldn't let them do it to another one of my friends. You understand, don't you, Jessa? I did not understand. I didn't understand any of it. It isn't going to be scary anymore. You can come with us. Yes, a girl who looked to be about my age stepped forward. I promise the hard part is over. They extended their hands to me, but I was so confused. I didn't want to be with these kids. I looked all around for my cousins, but saw nothing besides the water and the strange children. Jasper opened his mouth again, but I couldn't hear what he said. There was a deafening rushing sound in my ears, getting louder and louder and pounding against the inside of my head. The children, other than Jasper and the girl, started to fade away as a bright light opened up behind them. For a split second I wondered if a train was coming, and if it was going to hit all of us. And then I felt it, like getting punched in the chest by the Hulk. I thought for a moment that there was a train, and it had hit me. But then I heard people. Clear! Zzz. A second Hulk punch, and I was on the dock, puking water and mud and silt all over the paramedic. My parents and Uncle Jeff and Aunt Chris were all screaming and crying and cursing. Chris practically tackled the paramedic. It was light out. What time was it? I lay on my back as my parents and Mandy embraced me. It was all too much to comprehend. Jake and Eddie sat huddled under blankets, and Mel just sat with no blanket, with her arms wrapped around her knees, shaking back and forth. Of course, we told the police everything. At first, they didn't believe us, but then they found the land and the corpses in what had been the locked room and in the lake. The police deduced that Jasper's parents had been murdering and experimenting on children for decades, according to the bones they found in the lake. They believed they kept Jasper alive to help them recruit kids to experiment on, and if he didn't, they experimented on him instead, hence the eerie blue color of his eyes. They never figured out why they did it. When he met Eddie, he felt like he had found his real, true friend, and the police deduced that he locked his parents in the room and burned the house down, and then wandered out into the lake and drowned. Either accidentally or on purpose, they weren't sure. When the police went back to the house, nothing remained but some charred beams and pieces of the skeletons, and the trap door that led to the torture chamber, which was still intact since it was below the house. There were over 40 bodies of children in the lake, near where Jasper's cabin had been. The story hit the local news, and for the rest of our school careers, the 5 of us were regarded as brave heroes. But I wished it had never happened, that we had never investigated. Some things aren't meant to be seen, and I can't help but feel that us finding what we did more harm than good. The kids were already dead, the cabin gone. The only thing we accomplished by finding everything that we did was severely traumatizing ourselves. I've told this story many times. Since everyone in town knew about it, I guess I want to warn people. If you ever suspect that something is wrong, don't go looking for what it might be unless you're prepared for what you could find. And whatever you do, never swim too deep in a lake.